All right, welcome back to Comics and Chronic, everybody. I'm Anthony Iannaccio. As always, I'm joined by Jake FH and Cody Cannon. But today we're also joined by a really special guest, the only person in history who could say they were the first ever guest on Comics and Chronic. So that honor is bestowed to you.
I remember it was an early episode. But
it was like episode 9 or something, or 7.
First ever guest.
Wow.
Episode 7.
Wow. I am really flattered. It's been really great to see you guys thrive. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you.
I think you didn't even say my name, but I'm
Yeah.
Sorry.
Or if you want, I was just gonna say, let me do the fucking intro, please. So last time we spoke about their book, True Believer, The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee. Today she's back to talk about her new book, Ringmaster, Vince McMahon, and the Unmaking of America. Please welcome back to the podcast, Abraham Josephine Riesman.
Hey!
Woo! We did.
That was like a good ring announcer intro. I was really at a combined weight of 750.
Yeah. That's what I was going for.
What's your finisher move called?
Oh, well, it's actually funny you asked that. When wrestling was starting to get big in the Attitude Era in the late 90s, I went to summer camp, and I wasn't into wrestling yet. But because it was so popular, all the counselors, when you showed up at the dorms, it was at a university, it was like a summer thing. They had these signs up on the dorms telling you which was your room. And all the signs, they'd taken our names and not knowing us, just going off of like wordplay, came up with wrestler names for us. So at the time, the name they gave me was Abraham the Reaper Riesman, which I kind of like.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
Although I mean, that's a nickname. I'm trying to think. My finisher would probably have to be like, I don't know, the reap. That's no fun. That sounds bad.
The sowing, reap what you sow.
The sowing. Oh,
yeah.
I love it.
This is why I was on the writing team.
Like the opponent could be on the mat, and you could start to, he's sowing.
He's
and the crowd's like, he's about to sow.
Oh my God. You shall reap what you shall sow.
You reap what you sow.
Beautiful. I love it.
I'm excited. It's been a long time.
Yeah, last time I was here, I guess it was 2021. It would have been like March 2021, February or March. So almost exactly 2 years ago. Wild.
Nice.
How have y'all been?
Great. How about you? How's life post-pandemic? Because when we did this, the pandemic was
I know. Last book tour, I didn't do a book tour. I wasn't really anywhere, you know? Hey, that's the exact same. No, sorry, I don't have that boss. I don't have boss. I have Mav.
Nice.
Ooh, I think I have a Mav actually. I love Mav.
Similar to. Oh no, okay, mine's.
Ooh, that is a nice bong.
Thank you. I decided to invest a few years ago in having an actual nice one. Nice. So yeah, how do you all want to get started? You want to? Are we started already? I don't know.
Yeah, we're just started. We'll just shoot the shit for a second and then cruise into the questions. Get to talking about the book.
I can't wait.
You mentioned the last time that we talked to you was you didn't really do a book tour. Now that it's been 2 years, how's it feel with like the dust settle and your next project getting ready to come out?
Well, it feels crazy. I feel like I'm going crazy. Basically in a good way, but a lot is happening right now. You're catching me on a day where I am, in addition to doing my taxes, which is what I, should be spending time on, I'm spending a lot of time just sort of trading communications with people about the fact that a lot's happening. I just announced my third book, the second book, Ringmaster, which we're talking about today. So by now, your listeners will have seen possibly. I have my debut New York Times byline is coming out on Sunday. I wrote an op-ed for the opinion section about kayfabe and politics,
Oh, so cool.
which is a nice feather in my cap, although I have deep problems with the New York Times. It was an honor to be asked to get such a big platform, I guess. It's basically the op-ed is an excuse for me to try and get over with my baby's first neologism, like the first time I've invented a word and tried to introduce it to the lexicon to describe a concept. But I have this whole concept in the book of neo-kayfabe, and we can talk about that later. But I opted to do this op-ed because I think it's a really important concept, whatever you call it. And it was sort of an urgent need in this country, and I'm sure elsewhere, to kind of address a lot of the problems that neo-kayfabe creates. But yeah, so that's coming out in the Times, and we've got an excerpt in Rolling Stone that will be out by the time this airs. Nice. An excerpt in Vulture. Like, there's just stuff all over the place. And there's even a big sort of spin-off thing that I can't really talk about yet. Maybe by the time this airs, it'll already be public. But so yeah, long story short, it's been a pretty wild few weeks, and just this past week was especially wild because I announced the new book, which actually surprised at how much response I got to it. It's this book about Beck, the musician Beck.
I love Beck.
Nice.
Yeah, I grew up as a huge fan of, and am now doing sort of a biographical sketch of his arc from like 1988 to 2003 or so, kind of the long 90s. I'm not going to try to tell his whole life in equal detail. I just feel like there's a story, not that the rest of his life is unimportant, but that sort of chunk is this really interesting story in and of itself that is not just interesting to Beck fans, but rather is kind of a universal story. And I definitely can't tell you more about that. But, announcing that, I was surprised at how much response I got, especially because the announcement of it in Publishers Marketplace was deliberately pretty vague, just because I want to hold my cards close to my chest when it comes to the mass public. And so I was like, okay, well, there's like no information in this. It's Beck, who is not at the top of the charts right now. But people really responded to it. I think there's a lot of interest in Beck that is kind of latent, where it's like people know who Beck is, and they may not consider themselves like current Beck fans, but he has this deep name brand recognition, and there's this real sense of like,
For sure.
Oh, right, Beck. That was huge. Like, wow, I really liked Beck. Like, it's not that he's totally faded from the cultural consciousness, or that he stopped making music after the 90s, far from that. But he did, have this run in the 90s that was pretty insane. I mean, it was really, he was on the top of the world.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping to explore that and kind of what it tells us about a larger set of themes, both about America and about human nature, which I guess is kind of my shtick now, is writing books where I use a biographical sketch of somebody to talk about human nature and the nature of this stupid country that I was born into and continue to live in.
I love that. And I like,
Yeah, really.
I feel like that is probably a great transition into your book that we're talking about today, Ringmaster.
Yeah, Ringmaster.
Yeah. So far, you've chosen two people that we've been interested in genuinely, Stan Lee and now Vince McMahon, because a lot of us, especially Anthony and myself, like I grew up heavily on wrestling. It was literally my bar mitzvah theme.
Oh, come on. Really?
I
No.
shit you not. And this was, when it was still WWF, not WWE.
Of course, yeah.
So for my bar mitzvah, I had cardboard cutouts of Chris Jericho and The Rock, The Big Show, Stone Cold. I went to when WWF had their restaurant in Times Square. Like,
yeah,
I used to go to Madison Square Garden.
WWF New York.
WWF New York. I used to go to Madison Square Garden all the time
never
to watch
forget.
the fights. So
wow.
I grew up heavy.
Wait, how old are you? I'm guessing you're about my age. I'm 37.
I'm 34. I'll be 35 in a month.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. So you were a little younger than me, but that is my era as well, of when I was a super fan.
Yeah.
I started watching in earnest, like regularly in 99.
Same.
So I was a little late on the train, actually. But once I was on that train, I was, full speed ahead. I was like very into it back in the day. And then I spent 20 years not watching wrestling at all.
Yeah.
Like, I was very much kind of an archetypal fair weather attitude era fan in that I had not been watching wrestling regularly prior to that. I caught a little bit of wrestling when I was like 6 or 7. And, I dedicate the book to my mom because I was so into the fact that Hulk Hogan, who I had seen for the first time on this television programming when I was 6 or 7, I saw him rip his shirt open and I was like, that looks really cool. I want to do that. So I asked my mom for like a rippable t-shirt, thinking that was just like a shirt you could buy. And God bless her. She took one of my little kid shirts and cut a slit down the middle, not all the way, but like there's a big collar, like a V-neck, and then used shoestrings to like tie them together so I could, and then we could tighten it and I could rip it again. It wasn't exactly perfect, but that's why she gets the dedication in the book, is for making that.
Nice.
But when I really started watching it in earnest, it was 99. And then I gave up. It's funny to remember because it feels like this huge epic in my life, but it was over by like 2001. Like it was 99 and 2001 was when I was watching intensely, basically.
Nice.
And then when Vince bought WCW, as anyone can tell you, including the WWE, as they do sort of in these weird self-deprecating documentaries sometimes, after WCW got bought, the creative really went in the tank. Like it was a really rough end of 2001. So like as the fall wore on, I was just like, this is not really for me anymore. Like, I don't think I really need this in my life. I'm, too mature for this. And like, I should have to focus on other things. So I went back to my other pursuits, but that like 3-year stretch, boy, was I in deep. Like it made an impression on me. The metaphor I use is it's like, it was sort of like I went to live in another country for 3 years. You're not going to be a native of that country the way somebody born into it or who's lived there as a citizen for a longer period of time is going to feel. But you can get very conversational in the language and you can get a deep emotional understanding of at least like the first or second, layer of what that place is. And that was me with wrestling. Like I lived in wrestling for 3 years, WrestleLandia, and I got really familiar with it and emotionally involved with it and had a deep tie to it.
Oh, yeah.
And then I gave up on it. But 20 years later, when I was kind of trying to come up with ideas for book 2, my spouse and I were discussing just having a brainstorming session. She's a writer and editor herself, S.I. Rosenbaum. And we were just discussing what I might want to do. And one of us, neither of us can even remember who, said, well, what about Vince McMahon? And I don't remember who said it, but I do remember coming back to it in the conversation like, wait a minute, that was a good idea. We should talk about that. And one thing led to another. And this was a very good example of kind of being in the right place at the right time and, the wheel of fortune landing on the right idea. Because, no one had really done a systematic, journalistic, works-cited biography of Vince McMahon. There hadn't even really been many magazine profiles of Vince McMahon. He really had not been written about seriously in a mainstream outlet or for a mainstream book. So it was kind of low-hanging fruit, mainly because Vince's life is just inherently fascinating. Like it's really kind of, I can tell you why he hasn't had a biography before now. But it is on some level kind of absurd that he hasn't been sufficiently biographized. Like if I had my druthers, there'd be like a whole subdivision of like wrestling studies. And then within that, Vince McMahon studies,
So sorry, one of the questions I immediately wanted to like ask in connection to that is like, was there like a fear in approaching it? Like, or does that tie in?
How so? What do you mean? Let me take a bong rip while you rephrase the question.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is like, do you think there hasn't really been any in-depth profile on him or like another approach like this in a book form, in a biography? Because I'm saying like, do you think people were afraid of Vince or to approach it? Or if you got too deep, was there any fear, on your side with that, I guess?
Right. Like that. Got it. Maybe there should have been, but there wasn't, like it is a risky endeavor to go up and write an unauthorized biography of somebody who's the head of $1 billion corporation and who is known in the past for going after the press in one form or another, whether it's through legal means or using his bully pulpit. So I knew the risks going in, especially once I started doing the research, I really knew the risks. but I couldn't bring myself to actually be viscerally scared. It was just too exciting.
Nice.
This is perhaps a good thing about my writing and creative process, or perhaps a terrible thing. I tend not to get scared of the real world threats. I'm conscious of them, but I don't get the tension in my gut. The tension in my gut only comes with like, can I write the best possible thing?
Mhm.
You know, that's what really keeps me up at night is like, can I do a good finished product? And what comes before, like the dangers that come before that and the dangers that come after the publication when it's out in the world, they kind of just don't affect me on an emotional level all that much. So I can kind of ignore them. Not ignore. I mean, again, you always have to play it safe and be a responsible journalist, but it doesn't, the fear did not overtake me. My blessing and my curse is I just get really excited about this stuff. Like working on a big journalistic project genuinely gets me animated, and that kind of drowns out whatever fear there might be.
Nice.
I like that.
Well, again, I'm not saying that's even necessarily a good thing. Like having can be extremely useful. We'll see how all this plays out, but you know,
It makes you sound badass.
Yeah.
So.
yes, I don't know, or foolhardy, but yeah, one or the other. What else you got?
Well, so just going back to your fandom of wrestling, who was your favorite wrestler when you were into it?
Oh, let's see. I was trying to think about that the other day. I was like, who did I really mark out for? And I wish I could say I had some like cool off the beaten path ultra fandom for like Al Snow or something. Not that I'm endorsing Al Snow, but like, you know, at the time that would have been like a cool outre thing. But like, I was just a huge Rock mark.
Yeah.
I loved The Rock.
Yeah.
Like I'm currently in my idle moments, my sort of half watching at the end of the day is I've been watching VHS rips of the original broadcasts format versions of wrestling from 1999, like around when I was starting watching wrestling. I'd watched a bunch of that for the book, but as you'll see in the book, or as readers will see in the book, the main narrative sort of stops in 1999 deliberately, just because there was too much material in Vince's whole life to fit into one book with the amount of analysis that it needed. But also just because I think there really is a discrete story that ends in 1999, in the summer of 1999. But anyway, be that as it may, in my rewatch of these things from 1999, I've been really struck by the fact that like The Rock doesn't move me now at all. Like I watch old Rocky promos and I'm like, this is just sort of silly. Now, part of that is I read this excellent book by Bill Hanstock that didn't get nearly enough attention called We Promised You a Great Main Event, which is sort of an intro history to WWE. And it's mostly just a history, but he has some moments of sort of analysis that are really smart. And his whole thesis about The Rock, especially The Rock circa the Attitude Era, it was a parody of wrestlers. Like you can't accept it as just, oh, look at this dummy doing, you know, like if you're watching it as a modern viewer, you're tempted to go, oh my God, another catchphrase, like Jesus Christ, come on. But that was the joke, you know? I mean, it's hard to prove that, but like, because there's all the sort of kayfabe origins of how all this works. But I'm very sympathetic to the theory that The Rock was doing a bit. I mean, obviously everybody wrestler is doing a bit, but was doing sort of a multi-layered bit of like, this is how all wrestlers sound these days, you know? Like they've got their dumb catchphrases and they've got their, you know, dumb names for their, I mean, the People's Elbow, come on. A, calling it People's Elbow, and B, the fact that it's the lamest finisher in terms of the actual impact. Like, you do all the running around and the gesticulating, and then it's like an elbow drop, and it's like, who cares, you know? But I ate that shit up. I was so into it.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
I had like, I would memorize individual Rock promos. Like, I would just get like wave files that you'd find on wrestling websites, you know, where it would just be like, here's a clip of, this is like 99. This is before Napster even.
Yeah.
I'm like going to like weird sites and downloading wave files of recent Rock promos so I can memorize them. Like I was really into it. And, you know, Austin, I always sort of enjoyed, but by the time I'd started watching, Austin was on spottily because he was having health problems or injury problems. So Rock was if you start watching in 96 or 97, Austin was your guy, obviously.
Right.
But for me, I started watching in 99. And by that point, Austin was kind of on the disabled list. Like he was not showing up for matches all that often. But Rocky, oh my God, he was enormous in 1990,000.
Yeah.
Like that guy could have sold out Madison Square Garden just for like a one-man show of him doing his catchphrases in order, you know? He was really popular. And so, yeah, I liked him. You know, I kind of wish I'd been watching earlier so I could have appreciated guys like Bret and Owen Hart while they were at their peak. And I've obviously watched a ton of that and stuff now. But, you know, when I was watching, it wasn't that easy to get old wrestling stuff. Like, except for the select few things that have been put on VHS or the primitive technology of DVD as of then, you basically just had to like write letters to these shady VHS tape trading sites, you know, write emails to people and be like, hi, I'm 12. Can I get a VHS of like Royal Rumble 91? You know, like it was just... It was wild.
I was so lucky. My dad would, whenever there was a pay-per-view, he would just record it straight onto VHS. So growing up, I had every WrestleMania, every Royal Rumble.
Way to go, Dad! That is great.
Yeah, I was born into wrestling too. Like I wasn't like I didn't start watch. It's crazy. Like I started watching at the Greater Power storyline too. There was something about seeing that.
Yeah, there was something about that dumb story. Like it feels stupid now, but there was something about it that it kind of presages a lot of what television turned into, like regular television.
Yes.
Which is what's in the mystery box, who's under the hood, who is the fifth Cylon, who is the whatever.
Maybe that's why I like Lost so much. It
was very, I know, it was like the sensation I would get watching Lost, you know, a decade or more later. It was like this sense of like, I genuinely cannot imagine how they can resolve this mystery.
Right.
And I have to watch to find out what they're going to do with it.
Yeah.
And for me, the Greater Power storyline that Anthony was alluding to was, you know, it was kind of my introduction to Vince McMahon because I started watching in spring of 99, which is one of those weird blip periods where Vince was kind of a face.
Yeah.
Like they were pushing him as a face for a few months. And specifically, they were pushing him as a face in opposition to The Undertaker and this mysterious Greater Power who was directing
the Ministry, right?
The Ministry. And then, well, there's the Ministry of Darkness. Then there was Vince McMahon's corporation.
And then they fused together.
Shane united
for the corporate ministry. Yeah.
The corporate ministry, which is one of the most amazing two-word derby wrestling names. Like it's just corporate. We took the corporation and the ministry and became corporate ministry, and it becomes this beautiful word. Like it's very poetic in its way. You know, like there's a promo where Shane is like introducing the Greater Power, the big reveal. Months later, and you know, he's doing this little monologue about who the Greater Power, what the Greater Power is like, without saying who the Greater Power is, and he's going like, you know, he will do anything it takes. I can't remember the exact phrase, but like anything it takes to get what he needs for the benefit of himself and his corporate ministry. And it's like calling it the corporate ministry just sounds dumb, but saying his corporate ministry, you're like, oh, here's the corporation Pope, you know, CE Pope.
God, I love that.
So anyway, the Greater Power story was fascinating to me because I'd been watching Vince be a face for a few months. And he wasn't like, you know, an angel, but like it was like he was a tough-minded businessman who just wanted to give you the good product. And also he was being tortured by The Undertaker and the Greater Power, who had abducted his daughter and almost raped her on television. Part of the act.
It's such a crazy storyline.
Crazy storyline. This was Stephanie's introduction to wrestling. Yes. She had done like a brief cameo, not as herself, in like a 1998 thing where like Stone Cold is running backstage and like she's wearing a headset and goes, he's over there, or like, you know, like that. But then when she gets actually introduced as Stephanie McMahon, it's literally just because they need to have somebody almost get raped who can like seem to be close to Vince. And obviously his daughter is, you know, a natural pick for that. So after all of that, you know, all of this torture, I was starting to feel sympathetic to Vince McMahon. You know, you're like, wow, you know, no one should have to go through all that. Like, I'm 14 at this point. 13 at this point. So, you know, I'm suspending my disbelief to a degree that I wouldn't now. And I'm watching with bated breath for this episode of Raw where they're going to unveil the Greater Power. And sure enough, after this long preamble, here comes this hooded figure down the ramp who walks up into the ring, and there's a little bit of Mishigas, and then throws back the hood. And who is it? But Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon has been torturing himself.
Yeah.
Vince McMahon has been torturing his daughter. It's like, I'll spoiler the ending of the book. That's where I end the main narrative, because you can't pick a more resonant way to finish the arc of Vince's life up to that point than by him revealing himself as the one who has ruined his own life. I'm not saying Vince has ruined his life entirely, but he has a lot of struggles and problems and a lot of accusations lobbed at him. And ultimately, there are people who traumatized him, it seems, right. But also his greatest enemy has always been himself. And he's always had he's always had a way of taking his own psychosexual anxieties and personal preferences and peccadillos and turning them into content.
Oh yeah.
He was doing that before it was cool. That's one of the essences of why Vince has been so successful and why his approach to the world has now been imitated by so many people across a wide array of industries,
Yeah.
It really has worked for him. This okay, let me take all of my weird shit and make you look at it. It's what Taylor Swift does. He's a dark side Taylor Swift in some ways,
Was that the original subtitle of the book, Vince McMahon, The Dark Side of Taylor Swift?
I mean, Mr. McMahon, that's the essence. It's he's going out there and saying, hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. He's doing the Taylor Swift bit. But at the same time, you don't know how much of it's legit. You think you're seeing a glimpse behind the scenes or something inspired by real life, but you never know. You never know. Right. And Vince has said repeatedly that he didn't identify with the Mr. McMahon villain character that he was playing in the ring.
That blew my mind. That blew my mind that he said that.
I know. It doesn't make any sense. And yet it makes all the sense in the world once you know his whole family story and you go, oh, whether or not he meant this, the Mr. McMahon he was portraying was his dad. He was, although there were specific traits and such that had to do with him, the whole point of Mr. McMahon was he was this silver spoon, well-heeled wrestling promoter from the Northeast. And his rival, Steve Austin, was this shit-kicking poor Southerner who came up and just wanted to have integrity, etc. And that was how Vince perceived himself when he came into opposition with his father, I think, because Vince was raised far away from his father. The first 12 years of his life, he lived in dirt poverty in North Carolina with his mother and stepfather, while his birth father, Vince McMahon Sr., was having another family in D.C., having abandoned Vince's mom. And so, you have this, I'm just going off on a tangent, telling you the whole plot of the book. We should, but it's once you know the family history, you start to get a sense that the Mr. McMahon there, it's notable that the character is just the last name. And notably, it's the last name that Vince didn't grow up with. Right. Vince was born Vince McMahon, but he was raised Vinnie Lupton because his stepfather was named Leo Lupton. And the whole family they were named Luptons. He didn't become a McMahon until he was in high school.
Through your research for writing this book, is there a part of you that has either gained or lost respect for Vince McMahon?
Well, sure. I mean, my personal feelings aren't as important as one might think. I mean, I tried to just be as objective as I could here. But, there's certain things, I guess, it's not so much about the increase or decrease, because my knowledge of Vince McMahon was actually very sparse when I started this. I didn't have an especially developed conception of him in my head. I obviously knew who he was and had watched him a ton when I was a kid, but his real life was something I only knew little snippets of. And a lot of it was just sort of mythology, as it turned out. But you have to not admire, that's the wrong word, but you have to sort of stand in awe of what he accomplished.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I mean, for whether you think it was a good thing or a bad thing that he accomplished, he sure as hell accomplished it. He became essentially the only game in town for wrestling. for 20 years.
100%.
You know, I mean, and that's something that who can say that about their industry?
Yeah.
Especially in an industry without government subsidy, you know? Like maybe you can become a monopoly if the government steps in and says like, okay, we want to treat this like a utility. But wrestling is not a utility. Wrestling is an entertainment. And Vince really just won, you know? I mean, AEW has emerged in recent years, and AEW has been. Here's the thing: AEW is winning the coolness wars, for sure. But they are a microscopic entity compared to WWE. You know,
I went to an AEW match last year in Chicago.
Oh, sick!
Oh, really? What was it like?
It was actually pretty cool. My friend who I grew up with, Scott. We were both into wrestling together. I stopped watching after a while. He never stopped, and so for his bachelor party, we went to see AEW, and I was surprised that like Chris Jericho was there. There was a whole bunch of former WWE wrestlers.
Oh yeah, AEW is it's legit. It's just like I don't see it having, I don't know, the market presence outside of wrestling.
I agree.
You know, they don't even have a video game yet.
Yeah.
WWE cranks out an annual video game.
Yeah.
And even if people think the game sucks, they still buy it en masse, you know?
I used to love WrestleMania 2000 for N64.
Totally.
No Mercy,
No Mercy
games.
was great. Those games were amazing.
Yeah. And like now you just have the 2K series where it's just every year there's a new installment.
Shit.
Yeah, or it's slightly different shit. Whatever. You play it so you can complain about it or enjoy it. Either way, Vince wins because you bought it, you know, and that's the essence of the Vince McMahon strategy is whether you hate him or love him, as long as you're having some kind of reaction to him, he's making money and gaining an influence.
True.
Yeah.
You know? And AEW just doesn't have that. I mean, Tony Khan, come on. Tony Khan, as brilliant as he's been in some ways, he doesn't have the pure amoral energy of Vince McMahon, you know?
Exactly.
Vince McMahon, as he'll tell you this isn't me being libelous. He genuinely does not care about who he hurts. He said this in interviews. He'll be like, you know, I genuinely don't think about the people who I crush. You know, he talks about Andre the Giant. He was interviewed on that Andre the Giant documentary for HBO.
Yes, great documentary.
Andre, a guy whose life Vince allegedly pretty much ruined, and Vince was kind of aware of that. And he says in the documentary that he doesn't remember his last interactions with Andre the Giant because when something, I can't remember exactly. He's like, when I have something negative in my life, I know how to get rid of it. I can't remember the exact quote. I can pull the book, but like he says, I know how to get rid of it, or I tend to get rid of it. Like it's just. He blocks that stuff out,
cold.
And you watch him on like HBO's HBO for whatever reason, but Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel in 2003. And there's this shocking, fascinating little interview that the host did with, or the reporter did with Vince, where the reporter asks, like, do you feel any responsibility for these premature deaths in wrestling? The like mass of wrestlers who die before their time. Many of them from complications relating to drugs, which they did while they were at WWF. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about it? And he just goes, I take no responsibility whatsoever. You know, whatever habits those people developed elsewhere in wrestling, those weren't my fault. And that's, again, this isn't me being libelous. This is his own logic that he's presented, which the average person, if you say, oh, this person is completely amoral and doesn't care about other people, they might bristle or threaten to sue you. But Vince, you know, I go off of what Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, the first WWF champion or WWF champion, said about Vince in his twilight years. But he said, I think I can remember this one off the top of my head because it's the opening for chapter 1, the epigraph. McMahon Jr., that's referring to Vince, McMahon Jr. is the modern day Hitler of professional wrestling. And if you told him that to his face, he'd go out and buy you the biggest steak you could eat. That was the quote. And everything I've read and talked, all the people I've talked to, everything adds up to that. He does not care if you hate him. In fact, if you hate him more than anybody else, that's the nicest thing you can do for him, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
It's crazy. He figured out how to monetize people hating him. which now a lot of people do, but he figured it out before everybody else. Yeah, he was. I mean, that's for me, that's the most important way in which he presages what happened with Trump, his good friend Trump. Is Trump figured it, whether or not it was conscious or just that lizard-brained motherfucker like finding his way to glory, what he developed was an ability, this is Trump, to completely win the game no matter whether you loved him or hated him.
Yeah.
Like the more you denounced him, the more powerful it made him. And the more you praised him, the more powerful it made him.
Yeah.
There was, and if you didn't pay attention to him, you weren't cool and you weren't paying attention or you weren't up on things.
Yeah.
And it's just, what do you do with that? I don't know. I don't have the solution to that.
And he's also like cutting promos half the time. Like going back to what you were saying about The Rock, how ridiculous it's so ridiculous what he's saying. But like Donald Trump is clearly cutting promos. Like I love the way like you're pointing that out in the book. Like sometimes it seems like you don't even have to be explicit about it. You're just referencing the relationship between Donald Trump and McMahon, and you're just like, I was connecting dots in my head. I'm like, holy shit, like that's what he's been doing this whole time, and it's just like, fuck, like
that's extremely gratifying to hear because I didn't want the book to be, and here's how we got Trump thanks to wrestling, you know.
Right, and it does not come off that way. That's what I'm saying, not at all.
Good, thank you, because I didn't want it to hammer that. I didn't want to be pedantic and just go like, here's my big fat theory about how this relates to politics. But also, there just wasn't space for much analysis because the narrative is so fucking chock full of events and characters and background that I just didn't have room for a whole lot of dwelling on that. And so it's very gratifying that despite me not spending too much time pointing that out, that was still conveyed. So thank you.
Yeah, because I think throughout the book, you're just picking these like really intense moments to illustrate Vince McMahon's like, so going back to like his family and bringing that back in, how he's kind of like a fatherly figure to a lot of people.
Oh yeah.
It's a really fucked up way. And this, like, I had no idea about his call with Bret Hart and that whole story. I was getting mad. Like, I was so mad for Bret Hart. I'm like, how do you go back to this guy, dude? How, like, and that's everybody in the book. Not everybody.
No, a lot of people. Well, let me tell you, not everybody, but most of the men. Like, if you're a woman and something happened to you or allegedly happened to you, you're much more likely to stay away. Although not in all cases. Like, you know, Wendy Richter, who got very much a raw deal from Vince, came back in 2010 for the Hall of Fame. But men, oh my God, they have such complicated relationships with Vince. Well, especially the wrestlers, but not just the wrestlers. A lot of the people who work for him in other capacities too develop a real daddy complex for him, where and side note, I don't mean to make light of any of this, but there's sort of a grim gallows humor in this story. While my spouse, the aforementioned S.I. Rosenbaum, was my frontline editor on this book, and did a terrific job. And when I got to the point in the book where I was introducing Steve Austin, I had this sort of like, you know, couple pages long description of Steve Austin's youth and upbringing and how he was abused by his stepfather, but he loved his stepfather and like would apologize for his stepfather. And my editor / spouse just goes, you've told this story 80 times already in the book. Like every wrestler you introduce that ends up having a close relationship with Vince, it's either absent or abusive father. Oftentimes both, absent father and abusive stepfather. And they end up having these relationships with Vince where they kind of can't totally walk away ever. Now, part of that is financial. Oh, yeah. Because Vince, by making himself basically the only game in town that has any real money, you have to play ball if you want to get your merchandise sold and get those payments. Or if you want to just have any kind of presence at all in the industry in your old age. Like there's no pension plan for this profession. There's no union. Yeah. So you kind of have to keep sucking at that teat, but also they develop real emotional bonds. It's not just, well, I'm holding up my nose because I need the money. Like you're referencing that interview I did with Bret. Yeah. You know, Bret was like, he was like a father figure to me. And when I thought I was going to die because of cancer, I called him up to tell him I was going to go on tonight. That's what really struck me. That's what got me mad. Right, exactly. Like he kept. Bret was a fascinating set of interviews. We talked for like 8 hours over the course of a number of interviews.
Nice.
And he always emphasized, he would tell me these stories about Vince really hurting him. And then he would always emphasize, but I had a lot of respect for him, or I've made my peace, or as he said in that last interview, the one that I included in the epilogue, you know, he thought he could have been Vince's right-hand man.
Yeah.
He really admired what Vince did. From a creative standpoint, as a fan of wrestling, he admired the Montreal Screwjob. That's the most amazing thing to me. Is like he watched this thing happen. He not watched it. It happened to him. And then watching it afterward, it was like, gotta hand it to the guy. Like, that was good television.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy, but it's also, but who?
And especially after what happened with Owen, too, it's even crazier.
Well, but who among us has not had relationships like that in our lives? That's the thing.
Right. Yeah.
It just so happens that these people ended up having those relationships with Vince McMahon. And there are self-selecting reasons for that. There are random chance reasons for that, whatever. But what I hope to convey is not like, oh, look at these idiots who can't break away from this person.
Oh, yeah, definitely not.
I'm trying to say, like, all of us have attachments like that in our life.
That's how I feel about Anthony and Cody.
Just can't get away, can you?
They hurt me every day, but you know what?
But no, I for the love of the podcasting game. Oh my God. Anyway, yes. Okay. So what's up?
I was just going to say, so you've been talking a lot. What do you think that it says about these like blue collar, all of the people that like, not only the people that are involved in wrestling, and not all of them, obviously, but the people that...
but there's a lot of people who come from working class backgrounds. Yes.
And what do you think that it says about these people that like, they relate to $1 billion mega corporation, that they are like, oh, I can potentially be Vince's right-hand man. What do you think that like this says?
I know. Well, again, I mean, without sounding like just a vulgar Marxist, you know, we have... It's capitalism, stupid. You know, I mean, this is something that that wrestling, one of actually, I think the few things wrestling has more in common with sports than it does with theater and the performing arts, because theater and the performing arts at this point completely dominated by rich kids. And I say that as a rich kid, you know, like I come from money. And that's why I'm able to succeed in the writing arts. You know, there's no money left there.
Nepo baby. Just kidding. No,
I am a Nepo baby. I'm happy to be a Nepo baby. I want to use power. I try to use the powers for good. Yes. There's no point in like denying what I am. Yes. That doesn't matter. Yes.
It's honestly just a reference to an older, a recent.
No, but a reference to New York Magazine too. So I'm talking about. It's where I used to work. But with sports is one of the last remaining ways in the United States that a working class person can become famous. It's like that or going viral for having an epic fail on TikTok, you know? Like if you are poor in this country, fame is blocked off from you unless you just win the lottery. And the two ways to win the lottery for fame, if you're poor, are viral, you know, dubious fame online because you created some content that, you know, the roulette wheel landed on, or you go into sports. You know, you can have actual working class people get recruited for amazing athletic feats that they can perform.
True.
And wrestling is like that. Wrestling, although it is a very nepotistic industry, the people who make it to the top can often be people of modest background, because what you need is not something that you get at an Ivy League school. Like if you're trying to find a job in the performing arts or in writing or whatever right now, you need like a fancy bachelor's degree. You need to, if only because it socializes you and introduces you to the people that you need to network with, but also like it just gives you like sort of baseline cultural commonality with other people who might hire you, all that bullshit. But with sports, all you need is to be a stunning physical specimen with a great tactical mind. And sometimes not even the great tactical mind part, you know? Like, there are plenty of wrestlers who are basically just big lumbering beasts.
Oh yeah, you can just be a brick shithouse in some sports. And
You can be right. Less so now. Less so now. There was a time back in the day, basically before Vince kind of revolutionized wrestling for better or worse, when you really could make in wrestling, not only as a poor person, but as a total slob who did not know how to do any wrestling.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Oh, yeah.
If you were,
Mick Foley made a whole living off of it.
Yeah, Mick Foley.
well, Mick Foley, I know. Well, the thing is, like, there are.
Even before Mick, like
I'm saying, like, before Foley. I'm saying, like, back in the day when you'd have guys who were just enormous, like superhumanly large, and like Andre couldn't do that much athletically, like acrobatically. Andre was just too big. He couldn't do it, and he had health problems. But that didn't matter. He was charismatic, and he looked strange. And those are the only two things you need in wrestling. Can you be charismatic, and can you look weird?
Also podcasting.
But like the point is, you can now be somebody who does not come from money, and you can, although it's very hard, you can become a wrestling star. Whereas becoming a famous actor right now, if you're poor, I don't think that's actually possible. I just don't. I think it's the worst thing that happens in the creative arts. But I think it's just, if we're being honest, I don't think a poor person is going to become a major movie star anytime soon. Or at least, you know, the days of like the WPA and like federal grants for the arts and for poor people to actually learn things about how to succeed in this weird set of industries, that's gone. So anyway, I'm sorry. Now I'm ranting about capitalism.
So I have a question. Reading the book, I'm assuming not. Did you have, or maybe outside of even writing the book, have you ever gotten a chance to speak to Vince McMahon or meet him in person?
No. I tried, but I didn't try too hard. It was pretty obvious that wasn't going to happen. You know, I mean, I the day before the book was announced 3 years ago, I contacted a senior publicist at WWE and was like, this is just a courtesy call. You're going to hear that this book is coming out, and I wanted you to hear it from me rather than getting blindsided. Please let me know if you have any questions. And also, I would love to discuss, you know, perhaps having some kind of access to something. I wasn't even expecting an interview with Vince. I was thinking at best I might be able to get, you know, access to some documents or some low-level people, or at least permission to do something or other. But the publicist, you know, got back to me and thanked me for getting a heads up, and then said, you know, something along the lines of, feel free to send me requests of what you might want to do, but I'm not gonna, you know, don't hold out too much hope. And sure enough, I got nothing. You know, it didn't. They were not rude. They did not come after me. There was no threatening, nothing like that. But they have been completely unresponsive. They do not participate with this one.
We've talked about this a couple of times, but I mentioned it last time for sure. So I used to work at WWE.
Right. I saw you tweeting about that. I'd forgotten about that if I knew.
Yeah. So I wasn't there that long, like 5 or 6 months. My wife was there for a much longer time. My wife actually got to fly on Vince McMahon's private jet.
Excuse me, with Vince or just in the jet?
Not like directly with Vince. Yeah, like she was there. But like, you know, she got to be in his limo, his jet. Like she got to interact with him way more than I did. But I did get to meet him a few times.
Oh, did you now?
Yeah. So here's the thing. So I was on the writing team. I was a writer's assistant. If I had stayed longer, I would eventually get to be like in the meeting with Vince.
Right. I've interviewed writers. I know how that works now. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's like all these weird rules, and like what they told me this, and I don't know if it's true. They could have been ribbing me.
No, you never know in wrestling. I know.
You never know, though. Even the people that work there on the writing team, it's just the same culture,
right?
Course. They're gonna talk about heat. They're gonna talk about gimmicks and kayfabe. Like they're gonna
no selling things.
No selling, exactly. That's how like you just have to use the lingo.
Yeah.
But they were like, you can't even sneeze in front of the guy.
The sneezing is a very common refrain.
Apparently he fired someone for sneezing in a
What?
I don't know if that's true, but yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, this is a story I've heard a lot too, is you get when you get your sort of packet of instructions informally,
Yes.
not actually written down, but somebody like cornering you in the bathroom being like, look, here's how the rules work here.
Yeah.
You know,
No, seriously.
really? Like-
I'm not.
no,
Yeah.
Tony is completely right. Like that is how people who start, especially on the creative.
I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it. Like, I don't know.
That's fine. No, the sneezing thing everybody knows about. Like that's been reported everywhere. And his unique style when it comes to what he finds irritating or punishable has been widely reported. So you're not breaking new ground there. Don't worry.
Like, I was afraid I was going to get fired for the smallest things. Like, I was originally just working in Connecticut at the headquarters.
Yeah.
Like, all these things are like crazy to remember and talk about. It was a dream job for sure, you know, like as a lifelong fan.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
But then the guy that was working on the road, he put like one piece of paper on the wrong table, and Vince was like, fire his ass.
Wow.
Yeah. So they were like, hey, they called me Nacho. Like, everyone found out that I was Tony Nacho. So they're like, Nacho. Road Dogg was calling me Nacho.
Dogg,
Michael
yes.
Hayes was calling me Nacho. It's crazy stuff. First of all, my wife on her last day at WWE got to have a fucking beer with Stone Cold Steve Austin. She has way cooler stories. My stories are just tiny and whatever. But so I met Vince accidentally once. I was not supposed to meet him. I was not supposed to be in the room. He walked in. He walked up to me and shook my hand, smiled, and we both just walked away. I was like, holy shit, Vince McMahon. I just shook his hand. And then this other time, so like it was after Raw, so it's like midnight. We had to drive to the next city. This was this is what I had to do every week. If it was Raw, either you're taking a bus or maybe I have to drive 3 hours to the next city, right?
Right.
So it's 3 a.m. I'm like, I'm so fucking tired. Like, I'm going in the
Yeah, of course.
I'm going in the elevator. The elevator doors open up. Who's standing in there?
No.
Kevin Dunn and Vince McMahon. They're just looking at me. I'm like, I'll take the next one.
Yeah, no shit.
Vince is like, no, come on in. I was like, I can't. I was like, okay, like,
Yeah.
I did not want to be there because, like Abraham's saying, there's all these weird rules, and they're like, if you see Vince, just don't talk to him. Like, just don't. Like, I didn't know what to do. Basically, he just looks at me. He looks like up and down. He goes, huh. Nice shoes.
What were you wearing? What were the shoes?
They were like crappy beat up shoes. I'm like, oh really? I'm like, thanks. And then he's just like you know how you talk about the yuck.
Yeah. Well,
like,
Bret coins that term. Yeah. Where like
Yeah.
Vince has this laugh and sometimes a smile that even doesn't have to have the laugh that
Exactly.
Bret describes as the yuck, yuck, yuck. The Vince McMahon yuck, yuck, yuck.
So I felt it. I was just like I didn't know what to do. I immediately, thankfully, like my floor was the next. It was very quick.
Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, I'm going to be fired. I was like expecting an email the next day, like, fire his ass. What shoes was he wearing?
Yeah.
You know?
But like, that's how Trump operates too, right? Like, I mean, and not just them. Like a lot of people in charge who have figured out how to win by 2023 and be winners in this crazy year are the people who can rule by chaos like that, you know, where you're constantly afraid. Like he is somebody who really believes that it's better to be feared than loved when it comes to running a business.
I was even more terrified. It was 3 a.m, and this is a regular occurrence. He was going down to the gym to work out for like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah. Oh no, he and this wasn't that long ago. He's pretty old.
Yeah.
This was 2016.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, he's an old guy, and he's old beyond his years because he's put his body through so much punishment.
He also drinks this purple drink. I always had to supply him. There was like a crate of purple drinks. It was like, it's like a super, it's like Red Bull like times 5. Like
Right.
really,
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Wow.
just weird stuff. But that's my Vince McMahon spiel.
I know. Well, I'll probably talk to you if I do. I want to do a sequel at some point.
I would love a sequel to this. Yeah.
Like the book ends in 99, and there's obviously so much, I have an epilogue that sort of gives you the rough outline of some of the major signposts after that. But as anyone who reads the epilogue, I hope will think, oh man, wait, that didn't get much. I want to know more about that. Tell me more about
like each paragraph of the coda. I felt like could have been another chapter. I was like, I want more.
Exactly. Each paragraph of the coda is like, give me a whole chapter on just this, the alleged sexual assault at the tanning salon in Boca Raton. You could do a whole chapter just on, you could do a whole book on just the Benoit murder-suicide and Vince's response to that. Books have been done on that. So it's like, there's so much more, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I already know stuff about the past 20 years, or now I guess more than 20 years, from my research that I wasn't able to use. The book narrative basically ends in 99, but I didn't think that was what was going to happen. I started this book anticipating that I would write about his entire life. So although before I started writing it, even before I was like halfway through, most of what I had done was about all time periods. So I have a lot of stuff about what happens afterward, and a lot of interviews that didn't get used in the book because there were people who didn't enter Vince's orbit until after 99. But there's a lot there. And I think I'm going to wait until Vince is no longer with us. I think it will be time. I want to have more time pass because that will allow more information to come out and allow people to feel more distant from the events and be more comfortable talking about them. So I think I'm going to wait until Vince is no longer with us, and then I'll write the posthumous second half that sort of brings you all the way to the end of the story, which I don't know exactly what that arc is. All I know is that if I write the sequel, which I would love to do, I wanted to spend more time on the women around Vince than the first one did. The first, Ringmaster has a lot of women in it, but it's more about his sort of relationships with men. Whether it's mainly his father and Bret Hart, but also a wide array of secondary characters. And I feel like I would want the second one to be about Vince's relationships with Stephanie and Linda, and his mother, Vicky Hanner, who kind of drops out of the book after a bit because, again, I just didn't have space. But there's so much more to say about Vicky, who lived to be 101. She died last year.
Whoa!
I have a lot of stuff no one's ever.
Jesus.
Yeah, no one's ever known about Vicky. I have a lot of stuff on that. So my hope is I can do a Vince book and China. Sorry, that's sort of the fourth one that I often think about when I ponder that era is China. May she rest in peace. So, and there's more people, but I think Vince's relationship to the feminine, and more importantly, the feminine's relationship to him, because you have Stephanie and Linda, who are just as cold-blooded as Vince is, especially Stephanie. By all accounts, Stephanie has a gimlet eye and has sort of the combined best or most successful components of her two parents in that she is the prime McMahon. She's prime McMahon. She has Vince. Well, yeah, but she has Vince's ruthlessness. By all accounts, like she really just is similarly to him, will stop at nothing to get what she wants and will be the first to tell you that. But what she won't be the first to tell you about is anything about herself. That she learned from her mother. Linda is a very private person, and Vince is not. Or at least historically has not been. Recently, he's gotten to be a bit of a black box, but for many years of his life, he was living in public, and Stephanie doesn't do that. Stephanie keeps her cards close to her vest and also will stop at nothing. And I don't know where that leaves her. I don't know what her future is going to look like, but she has a lot in common with Vince, and I'd love to explore that.
She was on Howard Stern one time.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Wild stuff, baby.
Yeah. That was a funny episode.
Every time the WWE crosses paths with Howard Stern, it gets real weird.
Yeah.
Because you have these, it's especially back in the day. There's that Howard Stern interview I quote in chapter 1 where Vince was on Stern in 2001.
It's so uncomfortable. Yeah.
Very weird. Oh, you think it's uncomfortable to read, listening to it? My God. He had Vince on and led off with asking about Vince getting sexually abused by his mother as a child, which had recently been alluded to in an interview that Vince had done with Playboy. Like it had come out a couple of months prior. And so Stern begins the interview basically by going, "So I heard you were sexually molested by your mother. Tell me about that." And it just spirals out from there. But it's like, oh God. But the point is, it's so fascinating, that moment, because Vince is so open about his weird psychosexual peccadillos. But in that moment, he just clams up. He goes, "I don't like to talk about that stuff," And he tries to walk it back. He says, I didn't say that. That's what the reporter inferred or whatever. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. There's a lot to explore.
So I didn't know the term until I read your book, but you had mentioned it earlier in this episode. Kayfabe.
Oh, so yeah. Kayfabe. That was your guide to the world of bizarro kayfabe. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you delve more into that?
Sure. Yeah. So kayfabe, for those of y'all who are listening and don't know, is this word of unclear linguistic origin. It may be corrupted Pig Latin for fake or be fake. Huh. It's hard to, it's again, corrupted Pig Latin. Like it starts as Pig Latin and then through regional accents and whatever, you end up with this weird word that emerges in the late 19th and early 20th century, kayfabe, Kayfabe. And it referred to, it was kind of a multi-purpose word. You could use it as an adjective, you could use it as a noun, you could use it as an imperative. But overall, it referred to the industry, the central conceit of what made wrestling special, which was the lie, the big, flat, solid lie that what you saw in the ring was what you got, that everything was on the level in wrestling. That was the big, flat lie. And some people bought it. My research, I think, suggests that although there wasn't like polling on this, a lot more people knew it was fake than was believed. But everybody sort of kept up the illusion because they liked that big lie. They thought the big lie was nice. It was comforting and they enjoyed it. And kayfabe was sort of that, you could say, hey, kayfabe. And that would mean like, an outsider's about to turn the corner and see us. So we have to like get back into character. Or it could be, oh, we're not really brothers. We're kayfabe brothers. We're not actually related, but in the ring, we're supposed to be related.
Yeah.
Like Undertaker and Kane. That's a good example.
Okay.
Or kayfabe as a noun could just sort of refer to the whole system, where it's like you gotta obey kayfabe, or you gotta.
Wait, you mean the Dudley brothers were not
brothers? I know. Oh God. Oh man. Watching some of that old '99 stuff when they got introduced, I'm like, wow, the stutter and the Confederate flag on the head. It's really something to watch. It's really something else. And kayfabe really evolved in the 80s and 90s, first because of Vince, and then through developments that Vince didn't start, but he codified and like made the rule of the land. And first development was his rise and his desire to be taken seriously as a legitimate businessman. And ironically, that required him to take the business of wrestling less seriously and depict it less seriously. Because if you're going to get taken serious by business, you have to like let them in on the joke and, indulge their interest in whether wrestling is fake or not and kind of tell them. And also, it was a great way to avoid regulation. This is probably even more important. If you classify yourself as just like something like the Harlem Globetrotters, where you're doing like an athletic exhibition or Cirque du Soleil or whatever, then you're not subject to the same regulations and taxes that a sporting event is. So basically, they went on this. Vince and Linda went on this sort of covert campaign to expose wrestling for their own benefit, where they would be in lawsuits or in, state legislature testimony. And they would just openly say like, yeah, wrestling's fake. They wouldn't use those words, but they would just tell you what wrestling was. And in so many words, but, they would admit, they would break kayfabe. Let's just say that. Mm-hmm. And that was unheard of. And eventually all that behind the scenes maneuvering got exposed by the New York Times in 1989 in a story called Now It Can Be Told These Wrestlers Are All Just Having Fun. And it was this pretty facile article that was just like, hey, everybody, we now have proof that wrestling is fake, which is like not the interesting part about that story. The interesting part is the deregulation and the sort of seismic shift that was happening in wrestling about that comes along with the disintegration of kayfabe, which had already been starting. Because people were getting introduced to wrestling thanks to MTV, which Vince had partnered with, and a bunch of other factors. And outsiders coming to wrestling as adults are like, this isn't real, right? Like, this can't be it. Like, if you're not a wrestling fan and you don't start watching as a kid, it's much harder to look past the artifice. And so Vince had to kind of acknowledge it for what it was if he was going to achieve in his mainstream ends. And it worked better than he had even anticipated because he did not plant the time story. The time story was on its own and he wasn't ready for it. So once kayfabe was broken on that cold February day in 1989, they had to come up with a new strategy. And it took them years, they being wrestling. Like all the wrestling promoters did not have an alternative to the kayfabe system until the mid-90s. You have the early 90s, which are fascinating to watch, but it has not yet figured out what, as an art form, it's going to evolve into. And what it evolved into is what that term I coined, neo-kayfabe. Neo-kayfabe, which emerges in the mid-1990s, was not originated by Vince. Although Vince had sort of dabbled a little bit in playing himself in 1993 when he had appeared as the villainous Vince McMahon in local Memphis wrestling, which is a whole other story that we don't have time to get into. Other than that, he had been still playing it pretty safe on his own programming with like, this is, it's fake, but we're still going to pretend it's not fake, but not convincingly because we don't want to insult your intelligence, right? Like it's this muddled water.
Yeah.
And then in the mid-90s, you get this phenomenon of people, be they wrestlers or promoters, deciding to juice up interest by introducing little bits of taboo truth where you'll just say stuff or do stuff that seems like it's breaking character, seems like you're getting a glimpse of what's behind the scenes, like somebody's going off script. And that is an enormously powerful tool. Neo-kayfabe is this mindset where you're not quite sure as a consumer of it whether what you're seeing is real or not, or even if you know it's fake to some degree, you don't know where that fakeness ends or what parts of it are fake and what parts of it are real. And the human mind is so impressionable when it's trying to figure out whether something is real or not. So impressionable. When you're spending time, and this is true with Trump, it's true with a lot of Republican politics, and it's true with business, it's true with a lot of things. If you're sitting there going like, that can't, but if you're doing the kombucha lady thing where you're like, no way, what? But no, wait a minute. Like if you're doing that, you're paying close attention because your brain is trying to sort through, is that real? Do I file this under fact or do I file it under fiction? And because you can't figure it out, your brain starts to overheat and the application is the only thing that can run. Like you're just running on the, is it real or is it not thing? And you're just you're paying rapt attention while you're doing that. It's brilliant. Yeah. It started happening in little bits and pieces. And then Vince really enshrined it with the most astounding act of neo-kayfabe that ever happened, which was, of course, the Montreal Screwjob in 1997. When, in the context of this larger fiction of this one match for the WWF Championship between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, Vince flipped the script without telling Bret. He told the people, a select group of people who were involved in the match and needed to be essential to this plan, that the plan was Bret thinks he's going to get a disqualification that allows him to appear the next night and relinquish the belt. This is all details. The point is, the plan had been for there to be an unresolved finish. But instead, Shawn Michaels puts Bret into Bret's own submission hold, the sharpshooter.
Dirty.
And Bret, without tapping out, gets declared the loser. Bret does not tap out, does not submit, but very deliberately, everyone who was in on this conspiracy says, okay, Shawn won the match. And they'll run out because they know they're going to be yelled at.
Earl Hebner runs into a limo and he's gone.
Yeah, Earl Hebner getting out of there. Shawn Michaels getting out of there while garbage rains down on him. And Sexy Boy just echoes in the speakers. It's one of the most surreal pieces of television you can watch. Because you're sitting there going, was that that couldn't, what? Wait. And it was the only, it's still arguably the single most famous finish or even just moment in wrestling history in America and in the United States and Canada. Yeah. I challenge you to come up with a moment bigger than the Montreal Screwjob for not just wrestling, but kind of, I used to think in my more stoned moments, and I still kind of think this, maybe the Montreal Screwjob kind of was the end of the world. Like, what if that was the last one and everything else has been completely downhill from there, you know? Like, was something dark and unholy unleashed in the Corral character? You know, I don't know. But it really did. It was something dark and unholy within wrestling, which was after that, Vince started making the audience have that reaction all the time. He would have his wrestlers say stuff that maybe if you were a fan, you knew was true, but you knew would never be acknowledged on the show, you know. And then he would say, "Hey, Hunter," you know, like to Triple H, like, "Come out there and really shoot on me about how I screwed you for the King of the Ring 96. And so Hunter comes out and does that. And you're watching at home and you're like, he's allowed to say that? To like tell the boss to his face on television that he got, because he did get screwed. I mean, kind of, you know, it's up for debate. But the point is, you thought there's no way he'd be allowed to say that on television. And there he was doing it. And once you're spending that time going, I have no idea. A, I don't have any idea what they're going to pull next. And B, when they pull it, I want to be there to try to figure out whether it's real or not. Those are very addictive qualities. That's what reality TV relies on. It's what, singer-songwriters rely on when they put out new albums. You know, again, to the Taylor Swift metaphor, you know, yeah.
But also, once again, without you having to even mention Trump, I could think of moments where you see Trump on TV and you're like, oh my God, is he allowed to fucking say that? Like, why is he saying that? Like, is anybody going to do anything?
Yeah. I mean, think about the time he got COVID. And he like came out and like he literally wanted to rip open his shirt and have a Superman t-shirt on under it.
Oh fuck! Yes,
right? No, I as a comics journalist, I will never forget that. That was the moment superheroes died. Like that was the real death. Was Trump almost doing that? But there were all these moments where you'd go, "Is that what he must be doing a bit?" But you can't believe that Trump's doing a bit because he's so dumb. But is he dumb? But he must be. And then you're just lost in this endless chain of questions and you're thinking about Trump all day. And that was how Vince did it. You know? Yeah. Vince did that with wrestling fans in the late 90s, where you were constantly going, Vince, you motherfucker. But I can't deny that I really enjoyed that last episode. But that wasn't his fault. That was because the wrestlers were really good. But I guess he's telling the wrestlers what to do. But what if they're not doing what he tells them to do? And you're like, now all you're doing is watching Raw and then buying tapes and trying to memorize every promo of The Rock, like me, you know?
Yeah, no. And he did a good job of it because I remember being a kid and like when the rivalry between Stone Cold and Vince McMahon, and they'd be backstage and Stone Cold would like hit him with a chair and throw him in a
and you're like,
can.
That can't.
And I was like, wait, he's
actually the boss. Like, that doesn't make sense.
He's his boss, but he's not getting fired for beating the shit out of his own boss.
I know. It boggles the mind. And that's the point. You want people being boggled while they're watching, you know? Mm-hmm. Get the boggle factor higher and people are...
No, I honestly, I never even thought about that. But yeah, I remember being a kid and be like, wow, Stone Cold, so cool, standing up to his boss, but how is he not fired?
I know, but that's the mental process. And that's how everybody wins in this stupid economy now, you know? Attention economy is like, you need to. Vince also understood the attention economy before everybody else. In that, not just Vince, but like Vince Russo deserves some credit for this too. In that, Russo's whole theory was crash TV. It was just put shit on TV that will make someone stop changing the channel when they reach USA Network or whatever. You know, when they land on Raw, we need to be showing them something that is visually stunning and narratively, or at least just in terms of outrageous little one-liners, totally unbelievable and make somebody go, what? That can't be. You know, you get people to stop changing the channel. And that's how he operates.
One of the craziest things as a kid, I just could not wrap my head around it. I was like, I know wrestling is fake, but they're telling me it's real. There was a moment where Val Venis is so fucked up. He gets like abducted by this Asian group of wrestlers called Kane.
Yes, and they like cut off his dick.
Chop off his... yeah, what the fuck? I was like, what is happening on my TV? Like, it cuts to black, but you're like, what? And the announcers are like, oh my God. You're like, it couldn't have stopped.
I know!
What the fuck?
Well, that's the thing.
I was warped. I was warped as a child. I'm like, this is real.
I wish I'd said this in the book because it only occurred to me the other day when we were watching The Illusionist, me and my spouse, the movie The Illusionist. I don't know if you've seen it. It was one of the two movies.
Norton, right?
Oh,
Ed Norton. I hadn't seen it. She loved it, and I'd only seen The Prestige, the other magician, turn of the century magician movie from that.
Oh, that's the one I
Turn of the
saw.
century European magician movie of 2006. There were two of them, and I only saw Prestige. I never saw The Illusionist. But watching it, I was like, oh, I really should have made more metaphors or comparisons to magic tricks, because that's what wrestling really is. Especially when neo-kayfabe, where you're going like, what? I know it's fake, but like, how do you do it? You know?
Yeah.
And it's hard to do that way. You can do that sometimes with wrestling moves, but what you really can do the magic trick with is the words and the visuals of like obscenity. Like you're saying, where you want somebody to be going, well, the swipe of that blade must have kept going and that dick was right in the way. So I guess he's probably didn't get his dick cut off, but maybe this time he messed up and then you're still watching. You have to wait until the commercial comes back. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
There were years as a kid that I really thought like Kane was actually like third degree burnt on his face.
Yeah. Who didn't? Why would you believe anything else when they didn't let photos of him out?
Yeah.
You know.
That was the biggest mystery.
But like, it wasn't like, and here's a peek behind the mask of Kane here in WWF magazine. They really committed to the bit.
Yeah.
Even though they were telling you everything was fake, you were like, but that probably is real, right?
Yeah. It's like maybe that guy is disfigured.
Right. I know most of it's fake, but
yeah.
And that's how they get you.
Yeah, they really did. That's crazy.
Isn't that funny?
It's like you wanted it to be real. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, Kane's got to be that guy.
Yeah, you want it to be real, so you let it be real.
Yeah.
Or at least you go, I know it's fake, but this part I'm going to treasure and believe in my heart is real. It's like religion in that way, where you go like, I know this part of the Bible sucks and is stupid, but this part must be this part I agree with. So it's probably the word of God, I mean, I say this as a big Bible fan. I spend a lot of time reading the Bible. Once you're actually reading the Bible as a full document, you're like, you can take any position with this. Like there is absolutely, between the fact that there's no running thread because it was written by a million different authors over a million different years. There's also just the fact that like, oh great, now I had a stoner moment. I had a brilliant second point there, but I remember. You just don't know what most of the words are, especially the Hebrew Bible. Like the language is so archaic that since I've been studying the Bible in the original Hebrew and learning biblical Hebrew with this tutor the past 2 years. It's great, but like what you learn is some huge portion of these words we genuinely do not know what they are. The language is just too old. And the Bible is really the only surviving document we have of biblical Hebrew from the contemporaneous period when it was written. So all we know is like, like the word ark. We're making that up. The word is teva, which could mean literally anything. We don't know what teva means. It could have been a giant, it was a teva and a mabul. That same story, the flood. Mabul, we don't know what mabul is. We've just assumed that it's a flood based on context. But like, there's so much like that. And it's the same way in wrestling where you go like, I know there's a lot of gaps in my knowledge here, so I'm just going to choose to believe that this part is real and this part isn't.
Like comic books, like Jake always says, you pick your canon.
You pick your canon. And comic books is the same way. You're exactly right. Where you go like, that Emma Frost story doesn't count. Like I really didn't like it. It's amazing. This is how reality actually operates, and nobody is sitting around studying it practically. This is what I really tried to do with these books, and what I'm going to try to do with the Beck book in its own different way is try to get at this balance of fact and fiction that we all lead, and the balance and the false certainty that we all live with, that we have the truth or that we know what's good and what's bad. That was a big running theme of Stan. of True Believer.
Yes, when we talked about that, you said saint. He wasn't saint or sinner. Like he was a bit of both.
No, he was a dude. He was a guy. He was. I mean, maybe I should call this like the Just Some Guys trilogy or something. Ultimately, guys, they're just like some dudes who have their problems. Like, and they just happen to have had their problems at all of us, like it happens that they were either in the right place at the right time, or they were really talented, or as is the case in actually all of them, they were both, and but the point is they're just like you and me, Vince is a little weirder than you and me, but when it comes to the fundamental drivers of what made him that way, it's not like he sold his soul at the crossroads or something. He was an abused child, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Hurt people. I'm not excusing anything, but I'm saying there's this tendency to sort of mythologize Vince when I wanted to sort of, as best as I could, root him in flesh and blood.
Nice.
I think you did that for sure.
I think you do a great job of doing that in the book.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
I think that's a great place to wrap it up, honestly.
Yeah, especially coming like what you wanted with the whole trilogy.
Yeah.
We definitely have to have you back when you're done with the Beck project. I'm a huge
I would
Beck
love
fan.
that. No, that'll be a total delight. I wonder if I'll luck out the way I did with Vince in that Beck will maybe be back in the spotlight because when I was writing the proposal for the Vince book, Vince was kind of on a stable stasis. He was not in the news really all that much because he had just sort of been doing the same. I mean, this is an exaggeration, but nothing had really changed recently. But now, my God, Vince is all over the headlines. And I couldn't have predicted that. I did not realize that he'd be staging this coup comeback right at the time that the book was rolling out. I mean, the book comes out the Tuesday before WrestleMania, March 28th, everybody, ringmasterthebook.com. But if you come to ringmasterthebook.com, you can pre-order it and then get it on the Tuesday before Vince's big comeback WrestleMania,
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Always a
Seriously,
treat.
this was a
Always
great
a treat.
it was so much fun. I knew it was going to be. You guys have gotten a lot better at interviewing since your first interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sincerely appreciate that.
Yeah, we really do.
I love that. I take that as a huge compliment.
No, I'm not kidding. It was a very fun, easy environment, and you all combined well. It's just funny. Not like you were bad the first time, but it was clear that you all were not used to.
It was our first one.
You did fine for beginners, but now you guys are really a formidable little trio. So I'm really looking forward to this. This will be a lot of fun to put out in the world.
Thank you so much.
You could come back sooner than between 2 years.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure I'll have something like some article I put out at some point that we want to discuss.
For sure. Always feel free to hit us up anyway, and we'll arrange something for sure.
Sure. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
You too. Take it easy.
Hi, you're listening to Comics and Chronic, and I'm Jacob H.
I'm Cody Cannon.
And I'm Anthony Iannaccio.
And you can tune in every Thursday to hear new episodes of Comics and Chronic.
And make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Comics and Chronic. That's Comics, the letter N, Chronic.
We'll see you guys next week.
Woo!
Peace.